Greetings and welcome. My name is Aaron Craig, and what we're going to be doing is taking a look at one of the fundamentals in game development, programming, and GameMaker specifically, which is how to set and initialize variables when an object or instance is created. So there are several different ways to do this, and each one has its own purposes, reasons, and trade-offs for when you would want to do it. So let's take a look at the most obvious one, which is going to be the create event. So in this project, I have one object that I have placed in my room 5 times. And that object simply has one event called the create event, and it's set the speed equal to 3. So when I run this, what's going to happen is every single one of these is going to begin moving at exactly the same speed and remain that way for all of eternity. So this event runs one time, and it runs in every single instance. So that means that this one here, all of these run that exact same code every single time that we run this. And for a lot of things, that is okay, and that's how you actually want it to work. But there are times that you might want to differentiate your instances, right? One jet versus another, and you still want them to share the same code. You just might want them to behave slightly differently. One of the best examples for this is when you might have a player object, right? If this jet was a player, but we had a multiplayer game, this one could be controlled by player 1, this one could be controlled by player 2, and you don't have to rewrite code, have multiple objects, you just change a little bit. So how would we do something like that? Well, there's a couple ways. One, we can double click on this, and I'll zoom in slightly, and there's something called creation code. This right here runs after the create code from the object itself. And that means that this instance can run code that the others do not. So let's say we wanted this one to change its sprite to SPR. Let's see. I pulled this up from the prefab library. Sprites, vehicle air, jet. So it's SPR jet, and we'll do green spine. So there we go. So this one jet that I am looking at right here, I'm going to turn green. Let's try it. As soon as you do this, the order of events runs as the create code for the object runs. So it sets the speed for every single one. Then it checks to see the creation code inside of the room, and it runs that. As you can see, this jet is now green. So the order there is essential, because if we wanted to change the sprite for every single one, we could come in here and set sprite index equal to SPR jet. Let's go probably red, right? If I did this, every single instance would become red, except for the green one, right? So this changes all of them right there. So now we have, instead of the blue ones, which is what the sprite is actually set to, we now have it being changed through this create code. So 2 different ways to run code when it's created, and they do things differently. One of them, this create event, is going to run on every single instance. It's from the object code itself. Then you have the instance creation code, which is more specific. So each one has a scope, and as you get more specific, you can target fewer of them, if that makes sense. The larger the scope is, the more are going to be affected by the code that you put inside of there. Now, there's another way to do this. So let's say the speed 3 is our default speed. We want most of the planes to go there. Let's say this is a set of enemies, and there's going to be hundreds of them throughout the level, and this is the default. But we do want some to be special. So we could come in and add what's called it's called a variable, and it lives right down here. Let me see if I can minimize some of these. And we'll bring up the inspector on this object. And what that does is it gives us events specifically to this one right here. So when we add variables this way, we are almost doing the same thing with our instance creation code. This is what we call exposing a variable. So it makes it so that this, whatever we put in here, we can actually access by name somewhere else in our program. A lot of game engines and software IDEs allow you to do this. Imagine you're making a really complex template, like a prefabrication that can be used all over, but you want to be able to customize it in certain areas. You expose or make available just certain parts, like maybe the sprites, the color, the size, and everything else remains the same, but you can change parts of it. And so we can come in here and say, okay, I'm going to create a variable called fly speed, and its default is going to be 3. And now instead of this, I'm going to set this equal to our fly speed. Now, when I run this, it'll do exactly the same thing. Nothing will have changed yet, but I have made it so that the variable fly speed inside of our room, I can click on variables, and now it exists right here. And this is a nice visual representation of a variable. If I click edit, I can put this value to anything I want. So if I change this one to 10, I come down to the bottom one, and I'll edit this, and I'll change this one to 7, and I'll leave the rest the same, and I run this again. Now you can imagine pretty quick that the top and the bottom ones are going to fly differently than the other ones, because we have taken the speed, which is here, set it to fly speed, which is a variable that we created and named, and gave the value of 3 right here. And then in our room, we actually can set those. So this is something I use a lot, and it's a really useful tool to be able to make an object that can be very flexible or very generic, that allows you to use it in lots of different places. This is great for something maybe like a text box, where you can imagine, okay, I'm going to display text no matter what, but the actual text I want might be different, or the color or the shape of that might be different, or the sprite for my enemy might be different. We have the create event proper inside of the object. We have the instance creation code here. We have variables that we can expose from an object down here. The last way I want to talk about is, I'm going to come into object, and I'll just say creator. And what I want to do is, okay, when this object is created, it makes one other object, all right? So another way to do this is by passing in and data when you dynamically create something. So you've probably seen this before. When we say instance create either depth or layer, we can choose to create something while the game is running, which is necessary. This is called dynamic creation. And we can create it somewhere like 200, 200 on the only layer we have and the only object we have, called obj_jet. And when we create this, there are 2 ways to set data. One of them is by passing in a struct. So we can actually pass data in directly right here inside of this curly bracket, the last argument, the last property that you can actually pass in. So we can pass things in like outside data. So let's say we had a name we wanted to give this. This jet is going to be called the kilojet, right? So we could set my name equal to the name of something. Now, you do have to actually put a colon, not an equal sign, and you cannot use a semicolon at the end. You actually just use a comma or nothing. So those are important when you're dealing with structs. But this allows you to pass data in. Now, the limitation on this is that you cannot alter or edit the built-in variables. So if I wanted to set the speed, well, it looks like you can, but as soon as you actually do the proper syntax, you can't. This is not going to work. So if I come in and I place this here, and I'll delete this guy because that one's really close to where we're making the other, and we bring this in, my jet is created. You can see here that that's the most bottom one. This jet was made, and just to make sure that everyone can see it, all right, I'll delete these ones. That jet is created, but its speed is not changed from the default 3. So we can pass in and we can do interesting things like pass in data outside of here, but we can't alter the built-in variables. Now, the order here does allow you to alter the variables that you have exposed. So if we look at our jet, its speed is set to fly speed. And if I come over here, if I set fly speed to 10, it recognizes that that's a variable in the jet, and it will actually set it exactly as you would expect. So this order allows us to actually alter the variables that we have created, but not the ones that GameMaker has already put in there. That is an important distinction. Now, if we do want to alter a built-in variable, then what we need to do is not after create, or at least not in the create, but immediately after, we have to set those. And to do that, if we're just setting one property, there's a shorthand for it. You can actually just access it right here. This allows you to set one property right after you create it, because when you create something, it actually returns that ID. Now, oftentimes you'll want to store and save that ID to do multiple things with it, maybe in a temporary variable just for this event, or maybe in a global variable if you want to access to everywhere. I'll just call this a jet, delete that whole section there. And until I leave my create event now, I can actually say jet dot and access any property from inside. So I could say jet.speed equals 10. And if I do that, that top jet that is made, that speed is set. Now, because we're doing this after it's been fully created, setting my fly speed here will actually do nothing at all. And you can visualize that with the debugger. So actually, let me come in here and I'll press F6 to run the debugger and show you how this is working inside of here, right? So the jet is created on this line right here. If I move into it, what's going to happen is it goes into that event after it's created the object, and we're on this line right here. So we're setting our speed equal to 3. Okay? Then it's completely made it, and it's done. That's everything it needs to do. So the create event in the jet has run. Now we're moving on to our event right here, line 5, and we're going to go to the jet and access the fly speed and set it to 10, and that works perfectly fine, but fly speed is no longer controlling anything. It is purely holding a value, and that's it, because inside of this jet code, the only time we do anything with it is in the create event. So, all of that to say, look, there is a tremendous amount of ways to alter instances while your game is running, before it's running, and while you are setting up the room itself. You can come in and have as many different instances that you want, and they can look unique, they can act unique, and still share an object. The reason that that's so important is because you have inheritance and collision checking, which you can just check for one object, even if they're acting differently, and that is a thing of beauty. So, create event, variables, you have the instance create event, you have dynamically creating it, and then you have saving the ID instance and altering its properties, which technically isn't at creation, but it's pretty darn close if it's just a few lines after. If you have any questions, let me know. If you enjoyed the content, leave a like and subscribe. I appreciate it. If you want to see more stuff from me, check out my channel, Red Mage Creative, or my website where you can find some free, excellent courses on GameMaker at redmagecreative.com. Thanks for joining me so far, and as I like to say, keep making, keep learning, and I'll talk to you later.